All right, let's dive in. Today, we're exploring inner engineering with Sadhguru. We've got some great excerpts from his book, Inner Engineering, A Yogi's Guide to Joy. You've been asking about him, and I'm excited to take a look. I really like how he brings together ancient yogic wisdom with a modern scientific perspective.
Yeah, he's got this really unique way of tackling some big questions about life and joy and really our potential as human beings.
And I'm seeing that just from reading the intro to his book. He asks, like, can we really rewrite our destiny? Is bliss something we achieve, or is it like the foundation of life?
And he doesn't shy away from those tough questions, does he?
Not at all. But before we get too deep into all that, I'm kind of curious about Sadhguru himself,
Yeah.
what led him to these ideas?
Well, his path is, pretty interesting. As a kid, he was actually skeptical of traditional religion. But then, get this, he gets into yoga at just 11 years old.
Really? 11? Wow.
Yeah. And, he was really drawn to nature, too, like always exploring. He collected insects and snakes, even created his own little zoo in a canyon near his home.
That's pretty wild. Definitely sounds like a curious mind.
Totally. And then
Okay.
later on, he even chose to study on his own at the Mysore University Library rather than going the traditional education route.
So he was always kind of going his own way, like a true seeker.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He talks about having like a cloud of a billion questions. He even traveled all over India on his motorcycle, mapping out the landscapes he came across.
That's amazing. So I guess all of that exploring eventually led him to that profound inner experience he had at 25, the one that kind of seems to be the basis of his teachings.
Yeah, it seems like that was a real turning point for him. It got him thinking, like, why are we still struggling to find true joy and peace, even though, we've made so much progress materially?
Yeah, that's a huge question. Like, it's not just about external success, right? There's something
Mhm.
deeper going on. So how does he actually define this, like, inner well-being?
Well, he uses this word pleasantness. It's not just like fleeting happiness. It's a really deep sense of pleasantness in our body, mind, and emotions.
Okay, so it's more holistic, more sustainable too.
Right. And he's really clear that it comes from looking inward, not outward. He tells this funny story about a bull convincing a pheasant to eat dung to get strong enough to fly.
Oh, I think I've heard this one.
The pheasant believes him. Things like, hey, if all of humanity is doing it, and manages to reach the top of a tree, only to get shot down by a farmer.
Ouch. But it makes the point though, right? Like, chasing external solutions for inner well-being can really backfire.
Exactly. He wants us to understand the deeper mechanics of how we function. And this is where he brings in the idea of the five koshas from yogic philosophy.
5 koshas.
Yeah, think of them as 5 layers or sheaths of our existence. The physical body, the mental body, the energy body, the etheric body, and the bliss body.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how do these 5 koshas actually relate to inner well-being?
Well, Sadhguru says that inner engineering works mainly with the first 3 to achieve that sense of pleasantness he talks about. So it's about getting the physical, mental, and energy dimensions aligned.
So those 3 are key to creating a foundation of inner well-being.
Yeah, that's the idea. And to show it's possible when you start working with these layers, he tells us a really interesting story about Sadashiva Brahmendra. This yogi was so free from his physical limitations that he wandered around naked, like completely unfazed by it.
Whoa, that's quite a visual. I guess it shows you what can happen when you really tap into those deeper dimensions.
Right. Makes you think about what we might be missing out on by focusing so much on the physical.
Totally. So we've talked about looking inward and the 5 koshas. What other big concepts does Sadhguru explore in inner engineering?
Well, one of the main ones is karma, but he has a really interesting perspective on it. He sees it not as some kind of punishment for past deeds, but as an accumulation of unconscious impressions, that shape our lives.
So it's less about fate and more about understanding how we've created our own patterns.
Exactly. And becoming aware of those patterns is the first step to breaking free. He tells this story about a man who goes to his wife's grave and ends up grieving at her first husband's grave instead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it shows how our perception really shapes our reality. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond.
So conscious response is like essential to inner growth.
That's what he suggests. It's about transforming any situation into an opportunity to learn and evolve.
Okay, so it's becoming more about like tangible actions we can take. It's not all just mystical concepts.
Right. It's about having practical tools to deal with life. And another big one is the mind. That constant chatter that can be our best friend or our worst enemy. He describes 5 states of mind: inert, active or scattered, oscillating, one-pointed, and then conscious. And the goal is to get to that one-pointed conscious state. He calls it a kalpavriksha.
A kalpavriksha. What is that?
It's like a wishing tree. He uses it as a metaphor for a mind that's so well established that it can manifest our desires.
Okay, now that's interesting. How does the mind become like a wishing tree?
Well, he says that when our thoughts and emotions are organized, we actually have the power to create what we really care about. It's not about suppressing thoughts. It's about, like, directing them intentionally.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like taking the reins instead of letting the mind run wild. But how do we even start to cultivate that kind of mental mastery?
Well, Sadhguru says that even the everyday stuff, like what we eat, how we sleep, how we approach sex, can be opportunities to practice conscious choice.
Okay, I definitely want to hear more about that. Let's dig into those next time.
So are you ready to jump back into inner engineering?
Definitely. I've had some time to think about all this, and yeah, I'm really intrigued to hear more about Sadhguru's teachings. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's talk about devotion.
Okay.
Now, I know when you hear that word, you might think of blind faith or like strict religious stuff, but Sadhguru has a very different take on it.
I'm curious to hear it because he definitely doesn't seem like the dogmatic type.
Right. So he actually describes it as dissolving resistance. It's like allowing some kind of divine energy or force to flow through us, without any obstacles.
So it's less about worshiping a god out there and more about creating that inner space to receive.
Exactly. And, he tells that great story about the guy who's like cursing and thanking God at the same time at the dinner table.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That one's hilarious.
It shows how we can be so inconsistent with our spirituality. Like, we complain and demand, but we don't actually do the work to align ourselves with what we're asking for.
Yeah, like we're trying to have a one-sided conversation. So Sadhguru is saying we need a more authentic approach to devotion.
Definitely more integrated, for sure. And, he uses these really powerful stories to illustrate his point. Like, he
Wow.
talks about Akka Mahadevi, this queen who renounced everything, even clothes, to pursue her devotion.
Whoa, walking around naked in India back then, that's a serious statement.
It really is. It shows just how dedicated she was to her path. Like, she was willing to defy all these social norms. It makes you think, are we that devoted to anything in our lives?
Right. Makes you check your own level of commitment. But you're right, Sadhguru is not saying we all need to give up everything. It's more about transforming our experience through that inner work. Which actually reminds me, we were talking about the 5 koshas earlier, and you mentioned something called a bliss body.
Yeah, the Anandamaya Kosha, it's like the subtlest layer of our being,
Yeah.
beyond the physical realm. And what's really interesting is that Sadhguru says bliss isn't something we achieve. It's already there. Like, it's the very foundation of our existence.
Okay, so if it's already there, why aren't we all just walking around in a constant state of bliss? What's blocking it?
Well, he says we get so caught up in the physical body and the mental chatter and our energy levels going up and down that we lose touch with that deeper dimension. It's like we've tuned into the wrong frequency.
So inner engineering is about like realigning all those layers to let that bliss come through.
That's the idea. And he emphasizes that this potential is within every single one of us. It's not just for monks or yogis or whatever.
I like that. So what about the Dhyanalinga? He mentions this energy form in his book. What is it exactly, and how does it fit into all of this?
So he describes it as this consecrated space that's specifically designed to transmit a certain kind of energy, like it can accelerate spiritual growth. He even says it works on the level of the Akashic body.
Hold on, Akashic body? I don't think we've talked about that one.
Right. It's basically like a subtle blueprint of our being. It's more enduring than the physical or mental or energy bodies. And Sadhguru says transformations that happen on this level are essentially permanent, like they carry over into future lifetimes even.
Wow. Okay, so visiting the Dhyanalinga is like a shortcut to enlightenment.
I wouldn't say shortcut, but it's definitely a powerful tool that can enhance our practices and make the journey faster. But he still emphasizes that inner work is essential. It's not passive.
So it's more like an amplifier then. This is all fascinating, but I gotta admit, some of this stuff feels a little out there for me. Especially when he starts talking about occult powers and tantra and all that.
Yeah, I get that. Those concepts can be a little intimidating or even scary for some people.
Yeah.
But Sadhguru makes a really important distinction between occult, or what's called left-hand tantra, and spiritual or right-hand tantra.
Right. He's really clear about the dangers of seeking power without the proper foundation.
Yeah. He tells a story about Matsyendranath and Goraknath, these 2 legendary yogis. Goraknath was incredibly talented, but also impulsive. And Matsyendranath recognized that. So he sent him away for 14 years to develop more discipline and maturity.
14 years, wow.
Yeah. I mean, it shows you how seriously they took this idea of responsible power.
That's a huge commitment.
Right. And it highlights that you need to approach these practices with a lot of reverence and caution. True power, according to Sadhguru, is about mastering yourself, not manipulating external forces.
So it's not about black magic or anything like that.
Right. Spiritual Tantra is all about using those energies for internal transformation, for growth.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Well, we've covered so much. From Sadhguru's own path to karma and devotion and the dhyana linga and even tantra.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in.
I'm ready for the final part of this deep dive. What else is there to explore?
We still have to talk about the potential of our minds and how to move from those compulsive patterns to conscious choice. It's going to be good. All right, back for the final part of our deep dive into Sadhguru's inner engineering. It's been a wild ride so far. Karma, devotion, tantra, you name it, we've covered so much. What are some of the biggest things you're taking away from all of this?
You know, one thing that's really stuck with me is this idea that we're only using a tiny fraction of our potential as human beings. Like Sadhguru compares us to cavemen trying to use a computer. We have this incredible machine, the human body, but we haven't even begun to figure out how to use most of it.
It's true. Like, we have a smartphone and we only know how to make calls. Exactly. And he's saying we need to go way beyond just survival mode and start exploring those deeper dimensions. He even says that experiencing just 24 hours of uninterrupted bliss could, double our intellectual capacity.
Seriously, double. That's mind-blowing. But how do we even access that? It feels like a lot.
Well, the thing is, he's not saying we have to add a bunch of new stuff to our lives.
Yeah.
It's more about shifting our perspective, turning inward. He uses this really great analogy of a seed. If it tries to hold on to its current form, it can never actually grow.
So it's like we have to surrender to that process of transformation.
Right. But that can be tough because we have this natural desire for security. We want to feel safe.
Yeah, and control.
Exactly. But Sadhguru argues that by trying to, suffocate ourselves physically, intellectually, emotionally, we actually end up limiting ourselves even more.
Yeah.
True freedom comes from embracing the unknown, stepping outside that comfort zone.
That makes sense. And he also talks a lot about creating the separation between ourselves and our minds.
Yeah, it's a key part of his teachings.
But isn't that kind of tricky? I mean, aren't we our minds in a way?
Well, he suggests that the mind is really just a collection of information, experiences, impressions. It's a tool we can use, but it doesn't define who we are. And by recognizing that space between ourselves and our thoughts, we can actually start to break free from those patterns that cause us suffering.
So we become the observer, not just getting swept away by every thought.
Exactly. But that takes practice. Our minds are powerful. They want to be in control.
For sure. So how do we cultivate that awareness when there's so much going on around us?
Well, Sadhguru says it's all about one-pointed focus, training the mind to move in the direction we choose. He's big on organizing our thoughts and emotions as the key to manifesting what we truly want.
It's the wishing tree thing, right?
Yes. That's such a great image for the power of a disciplined mind. And he doesn't present it as something magical. It's a skill you develop through practice.
Okay, so no magic wands here, just good old-fashioned effort.
Right. And, he even suggests something as simple as consciously skipping a meal when you're hungry.
Yeah.
Just to weaken the grip of our compulsions.
Interesting. It's about reclaiming that power of choice.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job exploring Sadhguru's inner engineering. It's a unique blend of ancient wisdom and modern insight, and he gives us so much to think about. Before we wrap up, is there a final thought-provoking question we can leave our listeners with?
How about this? Sadhguru says that if you are aware at the moment of death, you will be aware beyond death also. What does that make you wonder about?
Whoa. That's a powerful question. It really makes you think about what consciousness really is and what might be possible beyond this life. I think what's so compelling about Sadhguru's teachings is that they ultimately point us back to ourselves, encouraging us to explore our own inner landscape. It's a journey of self-discovery, and I think that's something we can all get behind.